Welcome back! In this episode, we take on the peak of the Féinn, Sgorr Fiannaidh. Along the way, we'll discover the Celtic mythology of the Fianna and their leader, Fionn MacCùmhaill, and pay a visit to the picturesque Glencoe Lochan. If you find yourself enjoying the show, hit that like button and subscribe to see new episodes as soon as they arrive. It's a common misconception that the infamous Aonach Eagach ridge runs between the two Munros on Glencoe's north wall. In fact, the section involving graded scrambling lies between the lesser tops Ambodach and Sgorr, with Maelgherig located in between them. Sgorr Fiannaidh is therefore technically not part of Aonach Eagach and, given the ease of access from the west, does not necessitate going anywhere near said notched ridge if one does not wish to. Sgorr Fiannaidh has a spectacular sea loch view and a prominent granite cone on its north ridge known as Aonach Eagach. The two peaks are unmistakable seen from Loch Leven's side. We begin again in Glencoe village, following the orbital track for a kilometre or so until a turn off to the left at a small rise in the road presents the access path. Here the path rises to a small bridge on the left, where a path contours south along the hillside to a broad wooded spur. The path follows this up to a tree-lined gorge cut by the Aonach Eagach. Near the top of the gorge, it breaks off to the right to contour again before a hairpin bend where the going gets steeper once more. Before long, a cairn appears marking the turn-off to Sgorr Fiannaidh, a fainter but reasonable path winding up into the increasingly rocky montane. Soon, a steep scree path leads up to the ridge crest, and a winding, grassier ascent begins up to the west summit, where the dramatic grandeur of Glencoe itself finally appears. It's worth going to the prominence opposite Bitty and Nambaean for a view back down the length of Glencoe that will quite literally knock your socks off. The summit of Sgorr Fiannaidh is easily attained hence by following the ridge east, from where the formidable Aonach Eagach is well seen. Unless you're planning to take this on, descent from Sgorr Fiannaidh should be made by following the ascent route back to the old Glencoe road, and not, I repeat, not by the path bearing southwest towards Clachay Gully. Mountaineering is a dangerous and potentially life-threatening activity that should not be taken lightly. Watching YouTube videos is a great way to get inspired, but it does not in any way prepare you for the reality of mountaineering. The Scottish mountains are beautiful, but demand respect. Be bold, be safe. Yo, here we are back in Glencoe village, this time to take on Sgorr Fiannaidh up there, and the bridge of Coe down here. Over there you can see Stopcorn Nambaean from last time, and over there above Ballachulish you can see Benavair or Sgorr the easternmost of the two peaks. Beautiful day, getting some great summer sunshine, so without further ado, let's head on down there. Well, just at the start of the orbital track, there's also the option, as you can see, to go to Glencoe Lochan, an idyllic little hideaway amid the foliage. Just up this track here, not too far at all. So let's head on up there and check it out.
just our luck. It would appear that said Lochan has been accidentally drained recently, according to the signage around here. While it will gradually fill up naturally, refill naturally, it ain't just now, is it? Unfortunately, it's all mud flats. Normally this would be a very picturesque little Lochan, and obviously you've got the Pap of Glencoe. You can get some nice views if you go around the circuit walk on it here. Yeah, unfortunately it's more of a puddle than a Lochan at the moment, isn't it? But you get some sense of how picturesque it might be if it was full, or as advertised. Well, here we are, having just passed the Strath, and as you can see, the path to the Pap of Glencoe, which is the same one until it branches off, as the ascent path to Sgorr Fiannaidh. As you can see, it looks pretty well maintained at this section anyway. Let's head on up there. Yowza! As you can see, pretty much as soon as you leave the cover of the trees, you get a fantastic panorama of the western Glencoe peaks. Now you can kind of just about make out our path. Heads around here basically, and up around that rise, and then zigzagging all the way up to the rocky ridge there of Sgorr Fiannaidh. Hopefully start to get a bit cooler as the evening draws in. Well, here we are, just approaching the turnoff from this main track here. See this little footbridge over the river, or the stream I should say. And we're going to traverse along the hillside here, contour along a little bit to the Aonach Eagach, which runs down from Sgorr Fiannaidh. Okay, so what's the deal with this weird name then, Sgorr Fiannaidh? I mean, it sounds rather rude if you live in Scotland. Well, the Féinn that it refers to were a race of giants led by Fionn MacCùmhaill or Fingal, a legend of Irish origin. However, of course, when the priests came over during the Celtic migration from Ireland, well, they brought the legends of Finn and the Féinn with them as well. Now, Celtic mythology itself is legendarily, pardon the pun, voluminous. There's quite a lot of stories, shall we say. Now, the Gaelic mythological cycle is a little bit simpler, but it's still fairly long and meandering. It's basically broken into 4 cycles. You have the mythological cycle, which deals with prehistory, where a lot of the spirits and creatures that the townsfolk and the clansmen would fear originated. Then you have what's called the Ulster cycle, which tells the story of the land of Ule. The 3rd cycle, the one that we're concerned with, because it features the Féinn, is the Ossianic, or to use an outdated and to some a rather offensive word, the Fionn cycle. This deals with the legendary Fionn MacCùmhaill himself and his band of warriors. Following that, there's the King's cycle, about the High Kings of Ireland, such as Con of the 100 Battles. Now, the Fionn or Ossianic cycle is generally told in the voice of Ossian, supposedly Fionn MacCùmhaill's son. Now, those familiar with Glencoe may know of Ossian's cave on the side of Aonach Eagach on Fionnaidh. Now, it's probably more fanciful than any kind of historical record, because Ossian's cave is pretty much inaccessible unless you have rock climbing skills, and spoiler alert, it's more of a kind of very steep slope inset into the mountain about the length of a bowling alley rather than a cave. So don't go training to climb up there to explore it, because you'll be somewhat disappointed. The views, I would imagine, are pretty cool though. As for now, gonna head on round this corner. As you can see, we're just about to round this ridge here, and hopefully I've got a funny feeling there might be a nice flat place whereupon I can pitch my tent and enjoy a very pleasant evening with quite a spectacular view, as you can see behind us. Not bad, eh? Onward. This looks as good a spot as any, eh? It's a few, about 10 metres down from the path, so we get a bit of peace and quiet. I'd imagine this path is somewhat busy in weather like this. And you cannot beat that view, I tell you what, man. Beautiful, isn't it? Down here in the little bay here, you can see Yellenmunda, the Isle of Rest, or the burial isle for MacDonald's and many other clans in the area. It's a shared, a communal burial ground. Directly behind it there you can see the relatively modern Ballachulish Bridge. Now, there used to be a very small ferry operating over that tiny little sound or stretch of water just between Ballachulish there and the north side of Loch Leven. Over there you can see Sgorr. Over here, Miaulvor, the big round hill. Over there, Sgorr. Of course, Fíannaidh, and Stop Cornambea, and Stop Cora and Lochan over there. For now, I'm going to pitch my tent, enjoy the evening, and tomorrow we're going to bash on up there to Fiannaidh. Morning all. From our perfect perch, we head up here. Basically leaving the foliage behind and the trees behind, and heading up this path up towards the junction where the path splits. One side goes to the Papa Glencoe, Aonach Eagach, and our path leads us up to that steeper rocky section there of Fiannaidh. Let's get cracking. Well, here we are on the top of that little ridge outcropping thing, and you can see Aonach Eagach carving a gully down here, and our path runs up beside it there. You can just see it on the side of the trees. This is going to give us a significant height boost. Well, we've left the gully behind and heading out here in the southeast, or to the right of the gully, further up to around about that brow whereabouts it turns back on itself. It's not getting any cooler. Well, here we are, having passed the penultimate bend, and hillside obscures the pap of Glencoe here, but the final zigzag is going to be where we branch off to take on the big yin up there, Sgorr and Fiannaidh. Now, spectacular view over there to Fiannaidh. You can see Sgorr in the foreground here. Magnificent. Well, up ahead there, you can see the pap has appeared. And just before it, you can see just in front of where those people are walking is where we branch off. See our path branching away up there. So without further ado, let's bash on up there. Well, here we are in the rockier montane section, where we don't have quite so many turf banks, which would be pretty muddy and unpleasant, shall we say, in wet weather further down there. Now this stony morass here is known as Nap Glass, and obviously we're about level here, 724 metres roundabout, with the pap of Glencoe, Aonach Eagach. Over there, the Nevis has appeared, and a couple of the peaks of the Ring of Stale. Marvellous. Not too far to go now. Let's do it. Well, here we are on the slopes proper of the west summit of Sgorr nam Fiannaidh. Not far to go now, about 175 metres to the summit. Just incredible views over there. You can see the size of Fiannaidh there. Gigantic, isn't it? Rising straight out of the sea, or the sea loch. And Ben Nevis and the Ring of Stale looking lovely. And just up here, it's the west top. Let's top it out. Well, here we are, emerging onto the summit plateau of the west summit. There it is up there, and beyond there's a little narrowing ridge, not too narrow though, don't worry, over to the true summit of Sgorr nam Fiannaidh. But first, I'm going to head out here and check out this western prominence. I'm sure there's going to be a pretty nice view. Yeah, boy, look at that. Incredible view of Bithionn nam Bay, and showing off just how majestic and monarchical it really is. You can see they're towering above everything else in the glen. And as views go, I would have to say of Glencoe, this is probably the pièce de résistance. Look at that. You can see the ragged edge of Aonach Eagach there, rising precariously straight out of the glen there. Its volcanic origins quite obvious, as we saw last time. And you can see the greatest herdsman there standing guard at the mouth of Glencoe. Spectacular, isn't it? And just over there you can see, before Aonach Eagach itself, Sgorr nam Fiannaidh, our summit for the day. Let's fire on over there. Wow. So a bridge walk and a half, and you really get a feeling of why Aonach Eagach is so celebrated, not simply for its Eagachness or notched attributes, but the incredible panorama you have while you're tackling it. Despite the sweltering temperatures we've had all week here in Glencoe, Bithionn nam Bay, as we learned last time, has still a fair bit of snow hiding in the gullies on its north side there. And wow, look at that fantastic menagerie of peaks, valleys and crags. those unfamiliar with the Scottish climate, I should point out, you may think, wow, weather in Scotland must be amazing, because in most of his videos it's beautiful. It ain't. I got considerable trouble to align my visits with decent weather so that you guys can see something in the video, obviously, and just generally to make it a more rewarding outing. There are some Munros, naming no names, that you won't miss much by doing in a pea super, but this is certainly not one of them. Looking out over there to the old stomping ground of the MacLeans, over on the other side of Loch Linnhe there, and the Five Sisters of Kintail, Benavere, and down there you can actually see Ben Sculliard by Loch Crerran. Obviously the Ben rising above all else. Here we are on the summit slopes, proper, Sgorr nam Fiannaidh. Should be just about able to make it, I think, eh? See you up there. Here we are, 967 metres. Peak of the Fianna, or Féinn. Over here, you can see the bad boy itself. The maze of crags that is Aonach Eagach. And over there you can see Sgorr, the other Munro on this ridge.
Celtic mythology is truly ancient. The word Celt, hard sea, was coined by the ancient Greeks, Keltos, and used by the first scholars of their history, with the soft sea, Celtic, a later approximation adopted, most obviously, by sports teams in Glasgow and Boston. While we use the original, the soft sea pronunciation is not wrong in the way that Scottish Gaelic names are often mistakenly anglicised. It's just an alternative. The Celts originated from Austria and Switzerland around the 1st century of the Common Era, spreading west across Europe into Britain and Ireland, where Gaelic history began. It should be noted that Celtic peoples did not consider themselves Celtic, or indeed Gaels. These are retroactive terms used by scholars. As mentioned, Gaelic mythology originated among the Gaels of Ireland. The word Gael itself comes from Gael Glass, the founder of Gaelic languages according to the Irish pseudo-historical tome the Borga Bela, or Book of Invasions. When the Irish Celts migrated to Scotland in the 6th century and possibly before, their Irish mythology went with them. This is why some tales have Finn and the Fionn living in Scotland, hence Sgorr nam Fiannaidh, while the majority place him firmly in Ireland. Just to recap, Gaelic mythology is distinct from, but heavily overlaps with, the broader Celtic mythology. The Gaelic legendarium comprises the mythological, the Ulster or Yule, Fenian or Ossianic, and the King's cycles. The Fianna, the original form of Féinn, were first known as the Leinster Fianna, part of the clan Bisna. They fought with the Connacht Fianna and the clan Morna, eventually uniting to form the Fionnaidh, with Fionn MacCùmhaill as their chief. Membership of the Fianna was exclusive, but not hereditary. Aspiring members had to undertake grueling challenges and initiation ordeals requiring tremendous skill and dexterity. According to the Dictionary of Celtic Mythology, perceptions about the nature of an early Irish Fianna have shifted widely since the beginning of Celtic studies in the mid-19th century. These range from being chivalrous benefactors, i.e. Gaelic equivalents of the Knights of the Round Table or of the Samurai, to being parasitic marauders like the warlords of pre-Maoist China. Heroic and romantic portrayals of the Fianna began in Anglo-Irish and English literature around 1800, under the popular and linguistically erroneous neologism of Fenian. There's no definitive answers as to whether the events and characters depicted in these cycles have a meaningful relationship with reality. Some see them as entirely fictitious, man-made stories in the vein of Homer's Odyssey and Iliad, while many see them as analogues for, that is, inspired by, real events. For example, we know that Finn himself, as presented in the Ossianic cycle, existed long before there were any Vikings in Scotland to fight off, but it was probably conceived of in a time when there most certainly were. This latter, or mytho-historical view, is probably the most likely. Some scholars, influenced by James Macpherson's epic poem The Songs of Ossian, identify the Féinn as the Picts, the antecedents of the Gaels and the Scots, but these ideas are problematic, not least because they are contradictory to the enormous amount of Irish mythology that suggests otherwise. Some theories even claim that there really was an Irish king in the 3rd century of the Common Era called Finn, who had a troop of formidable warriors. But there's no evidence whatsoever that such a king or his warriors ever actually existed in any written record. It's fair to say that in his poetry, Macpherson's view of Irish-Scottish history is a romanticised fiction in the vein of later writers such as Sir Walter Scott and Robert Louis Stevenson, that is, to be taken with not just a grain, but a whole handful of salt. According to the Ossianic cycle, Finn MacCùmhaill, leader of the Féinn, the race of giants who defended Ireland against its enemies, both terrestrial and supernatural, was the son of Cúil, Now there's a nickname and a half. The first chief of the Féinn. Fionn MacCùmhaill was the father of Ossian, and it was Ossian who immortalised his father's deeds in his epic poetry. Fionn, meaning fair as in good looking, appears to have been the third leader of the Fianna after his father, and Gall of Morna, his father's main rival, before the aforementioned unification into the Fiannaidh. In the Ossianic cycle, Fionn MacCùmhaill acquired his legendary general knowledge in particularly bizarre fashion. One must first accept that in a pool somewhere in Ireland or Scotland there lived a creature called the Salmon of Wisdom. No, I'm not making this up. Fionn used his newfound omniscience to great effect, outwitting his foes with his knowledge of future events, driving the Vikings from the land of the Celtic. Those who've seen Fallen Kingdom will know that the man who really drove off the Vikings from Scotland was Sommelaigh MacGillibreach, but we won't let that get in the way of a good story. Indeed, there are distinctions to be made between mythology and folk tales, mainly that mythology makes some reference or analogy to historical events, or at the very least forms a definitive narrative, while folk tales were told mainly for entertainment purposes, i.e. to entertain the children, or performed by revellers at the Ceilidh, with fantastical imagination that may or may not have been influenced by the actual mythology, or far more likely, alcohol. One of these tales portrays Fionn as an Irish giant, and the creation of the Giant's Causeway is attributed to a battle between Fionn and a rival Scottish giant, Benandonor. Recent footage from this location shows what appears to be a giant entering a door in a cliff face.
We have some incredible breaking news for you today. There have been unconfirmed reports that the giant Fionn MacCùmhaill has gone into winter hibernation. Now, earlier today, one second. Oh, well, this is exciting. Earlier today, we're being told tourists and National Trust rangers saw the legendary Fionn disappear into a magical doorway within the rock face here at the Giant's Causeway. Right, I believe we have some footage that has been taken on a mobile phone. Let's have a look at it.
Look, look.
Anybody from along this part of the coast knows that through the summertime you'll regularly see Fionn MacCùmhaill somewhere along the Giant's Causeway, but through the winter time, of course, he's hibernating. Sure, don't all mythological creatures hibernate through the winter? So you never even see a leprechaun here in winter time.
Seems legit. The Isle of Man and Loch Ness are also attributed to Fionn's fights with his Scottish opponent as he scooped up dirt, forming the crater for Ireland's largest lake and throwing it at Benandonor, apparently missing, and landing in the sea, forming the Isle of Man. The following are a selection of stories taken from the original Gaelic tome The Boyhood Deeds of Fionn and James Macpherson's aforementioned The Songs of Ossian. So sit back, suspend your disbelief, and enjoy a couple of the most prominent stories from this pantheon of legends. Cúil was the chief of the Féinn. In a battle between the Féinn and the powerful clan Mora, Cúil was killed, and Gall, the one-eyed leader of the Morna, became chief of both clans. Cúil's wife had just given birth to a son, and knowing Gall would be merciless towards his vanquished foe's newborn, she hid the child away to be raised in secret. His guardians named the fair-haired boy Fionn, and as he grew, he flourished and became straight, tall and fearless. As Fionn grew in stature, his deeds were spoken of with awe. He was as fleet as a deer, and deadly accurate with the sling. Word came to Gall of this young man's exploits, and the chief realised that this must be Cúil's son. He ordered that Fionn be hunted down and killed. His guardians, hearing of the danger, dyed Fionn's hair black and gave him the name Diemna, bidding him to flee for his own safety. And so, Diemna travelled far and wide, and wherever he took service, he would learn the ways of battle. As his strength grew, he was able to wrestle any man to the ground. But in Diemna's heart, he longed to learn the lessons of wisdom and to search for the beauty of song and music. One day, he came by a river and found a simple hut where a hermit named Fiannaidh lived. Young Diemna asked the old hermit if he might stay a while and serve him. Fiannaidh agreed, but told him nothing of his own reasons for being there. The hermit had dwelt by the river for many years and fished in the river daily, in the hope of catching the salmon of great wisdom that was said to live within the pool. For years, this fish had eaten nuts that had fallen in the water from the overhanging hazel trees. It was believed these nuts had given the salmon great knowledge and discerning ability, and when a man named Féinn caught and ate of this fish, it was said that the wisdom would be passed on to him. On the third day after Diemna's arrival, Fiannaidh felt a tug on his line. As he hauled in the salmon, he knew that this must be the legendary fish at last. Delighted, he asked Diemna to prepare and cook the fish, but not to taste of it before the hermit. The young man obediently did as he was asked, and set about preparations. When the salmon was cooked, it smelled wonderful. However, Diemna, seeing a blister on the skin of the fish, pressed it with his thumb. The blister burst and burned him, and without thinking, he whisked his thumb up to cool it against his front tooth. Immediately, Diemna felt a strange sensation course through his whole being. He felt clearer and more aware of all that was around him. Giving his head a shake, he presented the cooked salmon to his master. Fiannaidh looked at him with piercing eyes. "You did not eat of the fish, did you?" "No, sir," Diemna said hurriedly, "but I burnt my thumb and gave it a sook." Fiannaidh sighed, then smiled and shook his head. "Your name isn't Diemna, is it?" The young man looked at the hermit. "No, sir, it is Féinn." He quickly explained the reason for changing his name. The hermit nodded and suddenly burst out laughing. "You have no idea what you've done, do you?" Finn shook his head, puzzled. Fiannaidh explained about the salmon of wisdom, and light dawned on Finn's face. Now he knew why he felt so clear-minded. From that day on, whenever Finn wished to know anything, all he had to do was press his thumb to his tooth, which made him a popular teammate in the pub quiz. The moral of the story? If you see a particularly intelligent-looking salmon, get it caught and eaten, and save yourself money on university tuition fees. Later, presumably in the autumn years of his boyhood, Finn journeyed to the capital of Tara, where the locals were being terrorised by a deranged pyromaniac called Aelin the Burner, one of the feared Tuatha De Danann from the otherworld. Every Samhain, Aelin would appear and set the hill and the town ablaze with his fiery breath. Gaul and the Fianna could not stop Aelin wreaking his yearly havoc because he would play a magical tune that put everyone to sleep. That old chestnut. Finn, however, outwitted the fire breather in a typically heroic and selfless fashion, imbibing a drop of poison from the tip of his spear, which, presumably amongst other symptoms, kept him awake during Aelin's soporific serenade. Finn then made short work of Aelin and, revealing his identity to the king, was duly made leader of the Fianna, displacing the dastardly Gaul of Morna, who henceforth declared a truce with the MacCùmhaills. Finn and his men were returning from a day's hunting when they startled a wild doe. Fleet of foot it ran away, with men and hounds in hot pursuit. Finn and his two dogs soon left the others far behind, but even he was growing breathless when the bonny deer disappeared over a small hill with the dogs, Bran and Sgorr, giving chase. When Finn reached the top, he halted in astonishment. Below him, the doe was lying on the grass with both dogs gambling around her, licking her nose and ears as if they were pups. Finn smiled and shook his head in wonder. This was a deer that no man should kill. That very night, as Finn lay sleeping, he felt movement in his bed, and there, lying beside him, was a beautiful young woman. She thanked Finn for saving her and explained that she had been the doe. The woman explained that her name was Scythe, and 3 years previously, an evil magician had put her under an enchantment. Finn, in his mercy, had rescued her, and now she was free. The two found love in each other's arms, and from that day, Finn did not leave his Scythe's side. But one day, word came that an enemy approached, and although Scythe pleaded for Finn to stay, he had to lead the Fianna in battle. He returned in triumph 7 days later, only to find that his lovely lady had disappeared, and not one of the people had been able to save her. He demanded to know where his beloved had gone. With great sorrow, they explained that while he was away, Scythe had watched for his return each day. One morning, she had heard the sound of a hunting horn, and with great joy had looked out and seen the figure of a warrior approaching with 2 dogs at his side. Overjoyed to see what she thought was her beloved once more, Scythe had run out to meet him, with the joyful news that she was expecting their first child. But when she got closer, Scythe gave a cry of fear and anguish. This figure was not Finn, but none other than the evil magician in disguise who had turned her into a deer previously. Swiftly, he smote her 3 times with his rod of yew, and immediately Scythe became a deer once more. The 2 dogs changed and became fierce, bloodthirsty hounds who gave chase to the fleeing doe. People streamed out of the fort to rescue Scythe, but it was too late. The enchanter, the dogs and the deer all vanished into the mist. Hearing this, Finn was broken-hearted, and though he continued to lead his Fianna, he searched for his beloved wherever he could. After 7 years, he gave up hope and gradually returned to hunting with his men. One warm summer's day while out hunting, the men heard their hounds baying in the forest ahead, as if they had cornered some great beast. But when the men approached, they saw no sign of danger. There was just a wild young boy standing naked and bewildered underneath a great tree. The dogs were called off, but Finn's hounds, Bran and Sgorr, remained. They gently lay down by the child and fondly licked the boy's arms and face as if he was familiar to them. The child returned with the hunters, but he had no speech. Soon he began to learn language, and before long he was able to recount his tale. From his earliest memory, his only companion had been a white doe who had loved him and shown him how to find food. They had lived simply in a cave where he had been content. But now and again a dark, cruel man would come to their cave, and the boy and the deer were very frightened of his power. One day, this evil man came and spoke threateningly to the doe. He smote her harshly on the back with his rod of yew and forced her to follow him. She had turned and looked at the boy with eyes that held great sorrow. She did not want to leave him. The boy had tried to follow, but found that he had been immobilized. The next thing he knew, he was waking up to the sound of dogs baying around him. Finn had no doubt that this boy was his own son, and he loved him dearly. He named him Oisin, meaning little fawn, and whenever he looked upon his son's features, he was reminded of his beautiful wife Scythe. Oisin grew to be a brave warrior like his father, but his greatest gift was in crafting words. Poetry, stories and songs seemed to flow from him, painting pictures of beauty, war, women and great deeds. The Fianna fought many battles, Ossian as well as any. But one evening as the men were camped around the fire, weary from combat, they heard the sound of hooves approaching. A tall white horse appeared through the wood, and upon it sat an upright figure. Her hair gleamed gold in the firelight. She was dressed in white, and even in the darkness, all eyes saw her beauty. Silently, every man respectfully rose, and Finn stepped forward and bowed low. The royal maiden came forward and halted her horse before Finn. "I have found you, Finn MacCùmhaill," she said in a clear, lovely voice. "My name is Niamh, and I come from the land of Fiannaidh. From afar I have heard tell of your son Ossian, a gentle, brave man who speaks words of silver and sings with a voice of gold." She then turned and her eyes searched for the tall young warrior in the firelight. When her gaze alighted on Ossian, she beckoned to him and he walked forward. He couldn't take his eyes from her beautiful features. In her quiet, seductive voice, Niamh told Ossian of her homeland where no sorrow was known, nor did any man grow weary and old, but rather more vigorous and youthful. She asked Ossian to return with her to the land of the forever young and be her husband. Ossian could not and did not want to refuse. As Niamh had spoken, his heart and his mind were filled with a love for the queenly lady. Willingly he climbed onto the back of her horse, placed his arms around her waist and went with her. Over sea, through storm and waves they rode. They came to a place of beauty and tranquility, where care and age fell away from Ossian, as if he had just discarded his old clothes. Their wedding feast lasted no less than 10 days and nights. Ossian and Niamh were deeply in love, and over time she bore him 3 children. Ossian was a good husband and father, yet at times his wife would see a far-away look in his eye. One day she asked him if he was content, and Ossian smiled and answered that he was very happy, yet he desired to look upon his land once more and smell the earth of home. Distraught, Niamh begged him not to leave her, but when she saw that he was determined, she reluctantly agreed to let him go. However, she warned her husband that many years had passed in the land of his birth, and that nothing would be as he remembered it. Niamh also ominously instructed Ossian that if he wished to return to her, then he must on no account ever dismount from his horse, or he would, quote, regret his actions. Bit passive-aggressive. Ossian bid farewell to his loving family and rode upon the white horse over the seas to the shores of his homeland. To his dismay, he found no trace of his father or any of the Fianna, and when he questioned a passer-by, the man looked at him strangely and frowned. He said that he recalled his father speaking about the heroes of old from ancient times, but it was only a distant memory. Greatly disturbed by this, Ossian rode on to the fort where the Fianna had lived, but little remained. Only weeds and brambles grew over the crumbling ruins. Tears of grief fell down Ossian's cheeks as he thought of all that he had lost. Now he bitterly regretted ever leaving his dear Niamh and their children. However, as he pulled on the horse's reins to turn and leave back for Fiannaidh, his eye caught sight of a water trough filled with rainwater, and suddenly he smiled. This was where he and the Fianna used to wash their hands. On impulse, he eagerly dismounted to use the trough one last time, but as his feet touched the grass, he collapsed and all strength disappeared from his body. Age and decrepitude suddenly took their toll upon Ossian's frame. He was so weak that he could do nothing. Too late he remembered Niamh's warning, and dismayed, he watched as the white horse turned, galloped from the glade and vanished. He tried to cry out for his comrades, but his voice was cracked and reedy. He lay there for a long time, broken, sorrowful and dried out. But Ossian was not yet finished. He found a hazel branch and with difficulty raised himself up and feebly shuffled out from the forest. some peasants found the frail, bent and white-haired giant and took him to the home of a nearby priest. The priest was called Patrick, yep, it's more than likely that one, and he treated Oisin kindly, listening to his tales of old. The aged man spoke sadly and eloquently of times long past, the hunting and the thrill of the chase, the camaraderie of the Fianna, the wonder of spring buds and birdsong, and the joy and companionship of women. In the years that remained to Oisin, it is said that the priest tried to persuade the man to, quote, take the faith, which we hope wasn't a euphemism, but Oisin stubbornly refused. To his very last breath, Oisin's whispers were of those he loved, of the Fianna, of Niamh, and of his children. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the show, hitting like and subscribe really helps the channel to grow and allows us to present more free content like this for you to enjoy. We'll see you next time, and until then, enjoy your adventures.